Now, let us turn to our next session, which is set to shine a spotlight on many of those elements just mentioned by His Excellency just then. Trade, equity, and industrial opportunities, which are emerging across most key UAE sectors. Everything from advanced manufacturing all the way through to digital finance. We're also going to hear how the public and private sectors are working in tandem to attract capital, boost exports, and support economic diversification. In the next few minutes, I'll be joined on the stage by Michael Katounas, who is Chief Investment Officer at Multiply Group, Alessandro Borgogna, Advisor for Cluster Planning and Development for ADIO, Mohamed Bardastani, Chief Economist for Visa for Central Europe, the Middle East and Africa, and of course, their moderator, Lenah Hassaballah, who is editor of CNN Business Arabic. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I'm so happy to be here at this very important summit. And as Sheikh Nahyan bin Mubarak Al Nahyan has just said in his very inspiring speech, this is a very timely conversation and this is a very timely summit for us to be attending and speaking about today. So I'm very happy to be here. Now, of course, as our wonderful moderator has just mentioned, we're going to be speaking about the new pulse of investment. Now, I think we can all agree that the UAE's commitment to creating a stable and attractive investment environment is very evident. From advanced infrastructure to investor-friendly policies and processes, the UAE has quickly and firmly established itself as a strong investment destination. Now, these are very big statements that I've just made just now, and I'd like to back them up with some numbers just so our audience can have an idea of what I'm talking about. So in 2023, the country secured its position as the world's second highest recipient of greenfield foreign direct investment announcements, closely following the United States. And according to the country's national investment strategy, the target by 2031 is to increase annual FDI inflows from 112 billion dirhams to 240 billion dirhams by 2031, and also to raise total FDI stock to 2.2 trillion dirhams, as well as raise the UAE's GDP to 3 trillion dirhams in the next decade. Now, big numbers, and a lot of it has to do with trade and equity, and this is exactly what we're going to be speaking about with our wonderful panelists. So, Michael, I wanted to start with you, and I wanted to start with essentially the main question. In your view, is the UAE a global investment powerhouse, and how big are the trade and equity opportunities presented here?
I have to start with the very clear yes. So I arrived in the country maybe 20 years ago. At the time, the UAE was predominantly an exporter of capital. People would fly over with a pitch book, try to raise some money for their businesses. Let's call that the first phase. Phase two, a number of major local champions were either listed in the stock exchange or privatized. That created direct investable opportunities for international investors here in the UAE. But they were all, the underlying thesis of this phase, phase two, was that they were all linked directly to the state, either from a regulatory perspective or from an ownership perspective. Phase three, is what we are facing now, is a pure private sector creation of companies that are globally competitive. International investors are choosing to deploy their capital here in the UAE in sectors like education, venture capital, energy. There's a couple of very big recent private sector energy transactions here in the UAE. It's quite exciting to see the progression.
Now, Alessandro, obviously you are coming from ADIO, and ADIO, everybody knows, connects businesses in Abu Dhabi with international investors. with the aim of helping companies access new global markets. So in this context, how does ADIO differentiate Abu Dhabi in the global landscape when it comes to investment partnerships?
First of all, what is ADIO? And sometimes people confuse our role with other entities in Abu Dhabi. Our role in Abu Dhabi is to attract investment in Abu Dhabi and to make the life easy to all the investors that they want to set up their private families, their business, their conglomerates in Abu Dhabi. Now, I need to say that our role, I don't want to say that it's easy, but is based on a very strong foundation of the Abu Dhabi economy. Over the last 20 years, Abu Dhabi built a very strong foundation around stability, security, very efficient infrastructure, digital infrastructure, transport infrastructure. And in addition to that, we started to build an ecosystem of an industrial footprint. As was mentioned before, now 50% of the GDP is produced by industrial activity that are not related to the oil. Now, what ADIO does in all of that, we transform all these interests in action. And how we do that, we do through partnerships. So we really join all the investors and the conglomerates to identify opportunity for investment in Abu Dhabi, but also then we connect them with our global network to make sure that their investment opportunities are not only limited to Abu Dhabi, but can grow outside. They can generate exports to Abu Dhabi. So our role is really building on the foundation of Abu Dhabi to make sure that all this opportunity becomes real action that support the growth of this company and the growth of Abu Dhabi economy.
A very important role indeed, and we're going to be discussing that further. But Mohamed, I wanted to hear from you from the perspective of Visa. How are shifts in digital commerce and services reshaping economic trajectories in the GCC and more specifically in the UAE?
Sure. First of all, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. So in regard to your question, I think there are a number of things. Especially post-COVID, we've seen significant shift in terms of digital transformation. There are a lot of studies that show we've witnessed like years worth of digital transformation in a number of few weeks. And one of the things that we look at Visa is we look at the share of all transactions that happen within an economy that are e-commerce or that happen online or happen as in m-commerce, mobile commerce. And then we also look at another one that's contactless cards. So when you go and buy something, whether you can easily tap your card instead of inserting the PIN number. So all these three metrics kind of give us an idea how digitally mature is the economy. And what we've seen over the past few years in the case of the Gulf and the UAE as well as Saudi, we see some of the highest digital economy maturity or highest rates of e-commerce and m-commerce in those economies. So I think it reflects well if you think of globally what are some of the most digitally mature markets, we have them in this part of the world.
And I think it's a very good indicator of business happening here and people using, digital economy, for sure. Michael, so obviously global and regional trade patterns have shifted drastically, let's say, in the last decade. In your view, how is your investment strategy adapting to these rapid changes?
Indeed, there are major changes taking place. And what we see is a translation of trade corridors into investment corridors. So we're seeing quite a lot of activity from south to south, as we call it. So UAE into India, into Africa. We're strong believers in the increasing disposable income and the whole middle class story of some of those markets, and very excited to participate in that story. The other theme that keeps on coming back is nearshoring. So with the fragmentation in trade, and remember, we are constantly in discussion with management teams across the world. In the old days, you would start talking about an investment strategy and structures and mostly about money. Today, a lot of those management teams are asking us how they can set up a presence here in the UAE. And it's not a rep office. We're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about distribution, we're talking about assembly, heavy part of the business.
And you've seen a rise in that demand.
Indeed.
Over the last couple of years, let's say?
Definitely last couple of years. I would focus it more on the last year, particularly.
Very interesting. Obviously, a big wave, Alessandro, of global investment interest. How is Abu Dhabi supporting this big wave of investment interest?
I mean, as I said before, we are supporting with our base economy first, so the infrastructure, the stability, and so on. But then we are able to identify partners that can support the investor locally, in order to connect with all the university, with the research center, with the government, but also by connecting them with our international network of offices, where we try to find partners that are willing to invest in Abu Dhabi, or partners that they are willing to export our products from Abu Dhabi to the international markets. So as Michael was saying, Abu Dhabi is really in the middle of not only these trade corridors, but also these investment corridors. You cannot believe we receive every day, dozens of opportunities that are coming to us, or opportunities that from here, they want to expand internationally. And as Abu Dhabi, because we have really built all the economy on true partnership, we help them to succeed in those activities.
Wow, seems very vibrant, and a lot of work for you as well at ADIO.
12 per day.
So, Mohamed, obviously, this leads to a lot of macroeconomic effects, and I'm very interested to know Visa's data insights. How do they help track or forecast these macroeconomic effects of collaborations across different sectors like retail, tourism, and others?
Sure. So I think one of the things, just like to set some context first, like in terms of one of the areas that we watch very closely as Visa is how tourism is doing. And if you look at international indicators as well as our indicators. So first of all, if you look at international indicators of arrivals to Dubai, or inbound arrivals to the UAE, or hotel occupancy rates, they've been doing exceptionally well in the UAE over the past 12 to 24 months. When we look at our data, some of the things that we look at, for example, just as again, like setting some context, if your bank card is issued in the UAE, and you travel and use it in the UK in a face-to-face environment, we can see that. So when you think about it in the context of big data, where you have millions of travelers from a certain country of origin to a certain destination, to a certain destination type, be it beach, city, mountain, we can track all of that.
Wow.
And what we've seen is, again, like we've seen stellar results when it comes to inbound travel to the region over the past 12 months or so. And one of the things we also collaborate with governments to highlight or to better understand the impact of some of their policies related to Vision 2030 or economic diversification is what are the impact of some of the big events on the local economy. So think about, for example, in the case of the Abu Dhabi, what was the impact of the F1 Grand Prix?
Yeah.
Or what was the impact of Coldplay concert? We can track that by focusing on cardholder activity and transaction. We can look at how residents behaved during those events within the area of the event.
And that's a sort of investment in the country. I think
Exactly.
Coldplay that time was insane, am I right?
Exactly. I don't remember the figure exactly in terms of the number of arrivals, but we've seen a significant jump.
Yeah.
And then also we can look at tourists. Where are they coming from?
Yeah.
How much are they spending around the event? Whether they are taking another trip, like going to Dubai and back to Abu Dhabi for that trip. So we can, we often work with government to fully understand this impact of those events on the local economy, the local community, through cardholder activity.
Amazing. And speaking of the different sectors and that are coming here and like that help with investment and the investment landscape, Michael, in your view, in what ways has the UAE's economic diversification strategy influenced your portfolio decisions in terms of the companies you choose to invest in across different sectors? Has that changed? Are you more focused on energy or logistics or tech?
So we heard quite a lot about the private sector today. We are these guys. So we spent quite a lot of time identifying the right sectors. We have a couple of pretty strong success stories. One is in the media space with a roll-up in the out-of-home space. Second one is in the beauty sector. In both cases, what we did was we created sufficient scale here in the UAE, where you have the regulatory environment to actually do that, and then use that scale to grow regionally, and from that internationally. And that's possible here. The second point that we find ourselves in many conversations with is about the regional consumer, and we pride ourselves of being a leader in that space. And a lot of discussion leads from the growth of the consumer spending in the private sector. And the last point, I cannot not mention artificial intelligence.
Yep.
The diversification to artificial intelligence allows us today to pick up the phone and call somebody here in ADGM, and they would come and they would have top-of-the-range offering that enables us to be at the front of.
Would you say that AI is the sector to invest in right now as a chief investment officer yourself?
To invest in and to benefit from. So a large part of our investment analysis focuses on exactly that, the value creation plan that rolls out artificial intelligence to every sector. To give you an example, in 3 weeks of rolling out various artificial intelligence platforms, before we had to roll out the training program, we saw a 15% increase in margin. Before training people what to do.
Wow.
It was unbelievable to watch.
Very interesting. And that's a good argument for investing in AI right now. Alessandro, ADIO uses a cluster-based model. Can you tell us about that and how it's transforming Abu Dhabi's competitiveness as an industrial hub?
Okay, when our leadership set the Falcon strategy, we were requested to identify what are the sectors and the topics that we needed to focus on. So when we did this analysis, we went really to each single industry and subsector and potential investment opportunity across the globe. And we identify a certain number of clusters. Why the cluster is so important? Because we are able to connect the dots across all the different stakeholders in the economy. So what we do in the cluster, we make sure that once we identify the investment opportunity, all the different stakeholders are aligned. So the university, the research center, the private investor, the government levers that we deploy to support the private investors. So far, we launched 3 clusters. One is the smart autonomous vehicle cluster. This cluster focuses on the future of mobility, on the sea, in air, and on the road, and robotics. We believe, and all these clusters are also based, as Michael was saying, the strong foundation of this cluster is artificial intelligence. Now, how we are building, for example, the Savi cluster, we are connecting international OEMs that are developing super innovative mobility vehicles, mobility investment opportunities. We are connecting with all the different stakeholders in Abu Dhabi. We are connecting with the guy that needs to train the pilots, the guy that will provide the infrastructure, the research center that needs to build some tools to support the transportation. So we make sure that the entire ecosystem will succeed on that opportunity. We launched recently also the life science cluster. And again, we make sure that the different investment opportunities that we identify around the genomics, pharma manufacturing, medtech, digital health, and AI, across those opportunities, all the stakeholders are fully aligned on what is our final objective, which is diversify the economy, but also to support, in that case, the medical security. And we also launched the food cluster. We call it Aqua, which really focuses on the future of food. The beauty of working in Abu Dhabi is that there is a stability of the economy and the political environment, and there is a very long-term vision where all the stakeholders are aligned to, from the top to the bottom. And Aqua, the food cluster, is really, in my view, the exemplification of this environment. In Aqua, our target is to produce the future of food, which are alternative protein. And we make sure that this is something so new that all the stakeholders, from the federal government, the local regulator, the research institute, are all aligned on these long-term objectives. So we believe that the clusters are a platform for investors to succeed in Abu Dhabi and then to export the product internationally.
Sounds like a very stable and very, a calming strategy for an investor who wants to invest in something that is so cool, like the food cluster.
And the most interesting thing is that when we receive inbound opportunities, having the concept of the cluster, we can really plug in that opportunity in this ecosystem and connect the different dots supporting the investor.
Oh, very interesting. Mohamed, we spoke about Visa's vast amount of data that you collect. How do you use economic data to evaluate the resilience of markets undergoing structural transitions due to new policies, let's say?
Sure. So one of the things that we've developed at Visa is called the Spending Momentum Index. And just, again, like setting some context, if you look at any economy today, usually the biggest component of it from the demand side is private consumption. So in the States, for example, it's 2/3 of the economy. So if you have a high frequency view on how consumer spending is evolving, you kind of can gauge how the economy is doing. And as I mentioned, so we have the Spending Momentum Index, and the way we do it in a given country, let's say for the UAE, we look at millions and millions of accounts, and we look at whether spending is increasing versus the same time last year, or whether it's remaining the same or is declining. So on a monthly basis, we produce this index for the UAE by emirate. You can compare Abu Dhabi versus Dubai and so on. That tells you whether more consumers are spending more or less. And from the previous panelists, one of the challenges they were mentioning that, in our part of the world, especially if you think Middle East and North Africa, there is a lack of data. If I want to know how consumer spending is evolving in those economies, usually you need to wait for 3-6 months if you're lucky.
Yeah.
So this is where we try to fill the gap. And essentially what we've seen over the past, let's say 3 to 4 months, early part of this year, in the case of the UAE, spending has been quite stellar. Overall spending has been increasing by consumers, which reflect overall, positive backdrop and growing momentum. And in terms of, global developments with the shift in terms of potential trade war, tariffs, and things like that, we still haven't seen it trickle down to the consumer as of yet. One area where we've seen some impact is if you look at future booking of travel.
Okay.
In particular to the US, so inbound travel to the US from certain countries that are being targeted by tariffs, from China to Canada to Mexico to some countries in Europe as well, like Germany and Denmark. There is a bit of slowdown in terms of future booking to the States. But overall, I think our part of the world, the region remains resilient. Based on our data, we continue to see growth in consumer spending.
Very interesting. Speaking about policy reforms, Michael, to what extent are recent policy reforms that are happening, such as incentives for green energy, local manufacturing, how are they reshaping your portfolio allocations? And what sectors do you currently see as the most dynamic? We already mentioned AI, but in terms of trade and equity opportunities?
Reforms and policy are important. At the end of the day, we invest in business models, we invest in management teams, we invest in platforms. Nevertheless, what happens at the regulatory level affects what is possible on the ground. On local manufacturing, we've seen now that it is viable for a lot of sectors. Things like packaging, personal care, pharma are all definitely viable investment cases here. We've seen some very exciting business cases in the industrial side. There is quite a lot of activity around 3D printing for some of the sectors that are relevant here. We've seen beautiful opportunities in vertical farming, combining technology with food security. I mentioned earlier a couple of energy cases in the UAE. To be able to develop viable private sector energy propositions is quite impressive. And I cannot not go back to AI.
Yep.
Multiply is fanatic about AI.
Yep.
And it's not only what you see in the news, the big numbers that are being invested abroad. These are enablers. On everyday discussions, we see local companies developing solutions that are world-class, enabling us to be today better than our counterparties elsewhere in the world.
So you're seeing this move as a country and the world, really, but here especially, towards more greener initiatives, more greener companies. You're saying this is actually also a lucrative investment.
100%. You cannot have a policy on its own driving a business model and a market forever. It can kickstart it, but it has to have a reason to exist overall, either because it provides a better product or a lower cost or a better experience. There has to be a fundamental business reason for a company to exist.
For sure. Very interesting. Alessandro, investor needs always change. How exactly in, let's say, the last few years have they changed in your view? And how is Abu Dhabi evolving to stay aligned with these ever-changing expectations in the investment landscape?
There are not only the investor needs that change, but there are also the technology that is changing very fast.
Yeah.
So if I connect with what we were discussing before, alternative protein, you can think about that today you can produce a chicken in a plant, so you don't need any more a chicken. So, and when you have all this innovation, these changes, you need to make sure that the entire ecosystem adapts very quickly to what is happening. And what we believe that all these major changes that are happening in the, not only on the technology, but also from an investment perspective, require a long-term vision. We believe that the investor now, they are not looking for anymore for short-term return on investment, short-term yields, but they are looking for long-term growth opportunity, especially if they are focusing on alternative protein, the future of mobility, artificial intelligence. How we adapt ourselves to that? In ADIO, as I was mentioning before, we truly believe in partnerships. So what we do is, first of all, we are very selective in identifying our partners, because are not partners for a short-term opportunity, but partners for a long-term growth. The second thing that we do, we become, this is what I tell always to my team, and my boss tells me, we become an integral part of the investor. So we become an extension of their team. And together, we try to address whatever problems they have or whatever challenges that they have in deploying their capital or to grow their companies. One of the major tools that all the Abu Dhabi government has implemented are the sandbox. The sandbox are tools that allows all this innovation to transform, to generate a regulatory framework, as Michael was saying, that is aligned to the investments. So the beauty of coming to Abu Dhabi is that when you are plugged in this cluster, are plugged in the environment, we make sure that the entire team, the entire government entity becomes an extension of the investor, and we support them to the entire trajectory until we succeed together. So we are building a platform not for short-term yield, not a platform for short-term returns, but we are building a platform that is stable and they can guarantee long-term investment returns.
And speaking of partnerships, Mohamed, Visa's partnerships with local governments and businesses, how does that enhance the economic stability and growth prospects for a country like the UAE?
Sure. So I think we do a number of things. I'll just highlight a few. One of them is we make sure that we build a strong digital payment infrastructure in the country by partnering with the government and making sure that the payments are working seamlessly and efficiently and transactions are going through. Another thing is what I highlighted earlier. We work with tourism boards in terms of better understanding the impact of big events in the local economy. So this way they can gauge or quantify how they are doing in terms of economic diversification. Another thing that we do, I think, related to the economic diversification as well, we enable payments across a variety of sectors, which generally, again, contributes to the overall stability of the payment system. And finally, we do work with governments, partners, as well as the private sector in terms of raising financial inclusion, doing some financial literacy courses as well for blue-collar workers, just to overall elevate the level of education related to financial inclusion and financial literacy.
I think that brings us to the end of our panel. I want to thank our panelists for these very insightful thoughts, and I personally benefited, and I hope our audience has benefited from their insights as well. Please give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.